All right, hi everyone. I think we're ready to start. So thanks a lot for coming to our session. Today we're going to be presenting on integrating advanced analytics into your BI solutions. So I'm here with my colleague Christian, and what we really want to do today is talk about some of our own experiences with integrating advanced analytics into Power BI, into generally BI solutions. Christian is going to talk about things a lot from his kind of customer perspectives and various customer projects he's done. I'm going to talk about things a little bit from the solution template perspective and kind of go under the hood to show how we actually go about automating and integrating advanced analytics. And if we go to the next slide, just to quickly introduce ourselves. I'm Justina Lichnik. I'm a program manager on the in the business applications group. And what I work on in the business applications group is something called solution templates. For those of you who haven't heard of them, I will give a little bit of an intro around it when I do my section. Before coming and joining the product group over here, I worked in the UK in Microsoft Consulting Services, where I did a lot of data science work. And now, passing off to Christian.
Thank you very much. So my name is Christian Berg. I also work in the business applications group as a program manager. And in that role, I work closely with customers and partners and have help them build and deploy advanced solutions. Prior to my current role, I held various roles spanning finance, marketing, and strategy, where I was primarily an end user, a practitioner of BI, but also built various end-to-end BI solutions. So to structure this, I thought, typically when you build a data science solution, you start off by defining the question, the action that you're trying to influence, and then you start to explore what could be good data to guide that decision. You explore that data, you try and understand it, you do model algorithm selection, you evaluate the different models, and then you deploy them, you operationalize them. So I thought I would loosely follow that structure when I walk you through this. Now, Power BI, when we think of Power BI and advanced analytics, many people think of it as a natural way to operationalize your solutions. I say that you have a trained machine learning model that predicts something or recommends something. It's a great way to get it out into the end user that has to use that information to make a better decision. However, I found it has been very helpful to me in various stages as you go along building these BI solutions. So here, for instance, I've simplified a retail data set. So I've narrowed it down to just a couple of stores. Here they're just signified by a store ID. I have a couple of products that each of these stores sell. And I have the transactional log data here. Now, the first thing that I did was, when I wanted to explore this data, was I wanted to understand how much autocorrelation is this. So, how much does the historic revenue tell me about tomorrow's revenue? And to do that, I started off with an R-powered custom visual. Now, if you're not familiar with it, if you go to the Office store, here just filtered to Power BI, and I typed in time series, you can see this was the custom visual that I used. What it does is it takes my original data and plots the original data here as the first line chart. Secondly, as that title here, it creates a seasonal plot. So it looks at the data, it understands that there's some cycles here, and it isolates that seasonality, that annual component in this case. Secondly, or thirdly, it shows a trend. So this is a super cycle trend that's statistically significant. And then fourthly, there's a remainder, right? Something that the autocorrelation alone cannot explain. Now, when you look at the axes here, the key thing to look at is not the intercept, but how much range, how much variance you get within each of these. So what I see here is that the seasonal component stretches between 550,000 and 650,000. Right? So all in all, it's a variance of about 100,000 that's explained by seasonality alone. The trend, on the other hand, only varies by about 10,000, so an order of magnitude less explanation in the supercycle. And then there's still a pretty big remainder here, so from minus 100,000 to 0. So I'm only explaining about half of I'm only capturing about half of the information with the seasonality that I could easily do from the uniform analysis. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the programming language, the functional programming language R. Say the majority, roughly the majority. Okay, so here I used an R visual to just isolate the seasonality, and you can see the script here. It's a very simple script. I'm taking that data set that Power BI gives me. converting it into a time series. That's this line here. If you haven't seen R code before, the hashtags are comments, so you don't need to read those. Those are just for my own guidance. And then I'm breaking out the seasonal component of that, and I'm plotting it as a month plot. Of course, what's really impactful now, what's really powerful with Power BI, is that I can now go through this analysis for the different stores, for the different areas, for the different products, and I can, of course, now drill into them to look at the intersections. And that's interesting, right? Because understanding the all-up seasonality is good, but I might have very different business groups that I'm analyzing, and I might find that one subset is better served with one type of algorithm than another one is. And also, when you do this kind of analysis, you might find one of these groups have no seasonality, and it might indicate like a data problem, right? Or you might realize that there's something going on with the trend that's more than you would expect, and you realize you've discontinued an important line, right? Or you've discontinued a big marketing investment that you used to run, or something like that, which is a good indication that there's something else that you should be encompassing in your model. On a similar note, right? Like whenever I'm exploring new data for the first time, I usually just try to do like a simple time series forecast. So if you're not familiar with it, when you have a Power BI line chart like here, this is just a normal line chart where I'm plotting revenue against time. You can go into the analysis pane here and add a forecast line, and you use the built-in exponential smoothing capability in Power BI. I can specify here how long the length is. I know it's annual data that's aggregated on month, so I know the seasonality should be monthly. I can apply that, and I see here now the 95% confidence interval, and I can get an intuitive sense for how much information is there just in that one variable. Similarly, then, if I wanted to test, which factors would be interesting, if I wanted to combine various types of algorithms into an ensemble, if I wanted to use regression models in combination with my seasonality or my autocorrelation, I can go through here the different products, and I can see what a coefficient plot would look like. How much would what factor would it apply to the different columns in my data set? I can do a quick residual check here to see that the standard error doesn't have any strong trends and that it's what we call randomly distributed. And I can also see here which are the factors that are the most important when I don't look at the seasonality. So here, for instance, when I selected now product 1, what I see is that the price of product 4 and the price of product 5 have significant added variable uplift. So rather than just doing a time series forecast, I would have a better result if I also used those two factors to try and explain my revenue for tomorrow. Similarly, another R-powered custom visual that we can use is a tree if we want to do multivariate analysis. And this is different to a normal linear regression type of analysis in that it also considers multiple conditions. Right? So say that only when you're running a marketing campaign is this other factor relevant. When you're not running a marketing campaign, you may disregard it. These are things which are very hard to see for you when you're just looking at tabular data. And it's a lot of work to get these kind of insights quickly when you're using a standard data science tool. And of course, like loading this data into Power BI, doing the ETL, the transform, using the query editor is all very quick. And then, of course, like I said, whether you build your model directly in Power BI, right? I don't know if you saw Leila's session on embedding R in Power BI, where she used the a priori method when she imported the data, or whether you use something like Azure Machine Learning Studio, which Justina will talk about. Once you've run that forecast, once you've developed those scores, Power BI is, of course, a great way to evaluate your model. So what I've done here is I created an ensemble model in Azure Machine Learning Studio, and I wrote that back into Power BI. And I plotted here the error term as a column, the revenue as the black line, and the predicted value as the red line. Now imagine that you have a P&L owner who's going to make inventory decisions based on this forecast that you created. And he might already today have a bunch of analysts doing these kind of predictions for him. How do you convince him that your model is better? Well, unless he's very comfortable talking about stats values, right? You might find that you're better off you're better off visualizing this for her. So you can go through these now one at a time. You can look at it by product. You can look at it by area. And you can compare the model's performance versus your analyst's forecast. You can compare it for the different subsets of the business. And you can give him or her like an intuitive sense for where is this model performing better, where should we do an average between what we used to do and what we do today, and where should we stick with our current business process. So I found that to be very useful. Of course, also models, right, which you cannot easily pre-calculate. Here, for instance, I'm doing a market basket analysis, or not market basket analysis, I'm doing a causal impact analysis, trying to explain post-fact how much impact did that investment that you made have. And investments, right, are things that we make very frequently. I built this report for a colleague of mine in marketing who ran multiple small social media campaigns, right? Investments like in the 10 to 20K range typically. But you want to understand which of these investments had the most impact, which of them had a statistically significant impact on product sales, on liking, etc. Now, the challenge of doing that is that you need to establish a baseline. So what this algorithm does is it accepts, in this case, a bunch of different products as input. It tries to find good analogous products for the one that you made an investment in. So it looks at all of your data, it looks at it over time, and it says, in the past, which other products were good proxies for the product that you're trying to establish a baseline for? And it does it in a smart way. Right? So it takes both dynamic time warp into account and also intercept offset. So it doesn't matter if the analogy is a much smaller business, and it doesn't matter that it's a leading indicator, as long as that is a static relationship, a constant relationship that it has to the one that you're trying to invest in. And what we see here is we see the actual data, the actual result, which is the full line, the solid line. We see the predicted result, which is the dotted line, and we see the confidence interval. So you can see here, this is the intercept. This is where the investment was made. And this is what happened to the actual revenue post that point. And this is what the model would have predicted with the confidence interval. The second chart shows a pointwise, just showing the delta between the two, just that variance from week to week. And the third one shows the cumulative impact. And you can see, like, as you leave the point, the intercept point, that standard deviation, so that the confidence interval increases, right, over time. So it's larger and larger uncertainty as you go further and further away from the point of intervention. Very helpful, right? And the way I presented this to her was in a view like this, where I added a slicer so that she could select which date did the investment happen on, and another slicer to select which product was the investment made in. And as soon as I change either of these, you'll see that these visualizations recalculate, and it re-estimates what that impact was. So this is now a self-serve, sophisticated solution that she can run over and over again on her data. Each time, it will try and find the best proxies based on what has happened in the past to establish the baseline and estimate that impact. So if, for instance, I move that back, you can see that intervention data, I moved it back by 2 months. So initially here, there's no statistically significant impact, and the impact only happens from that date of intervention. And we can, again, estimate that cumulative effect, right? So now the confidence interval grew a bit because I inputted the wrong date, but now we can see that it's somewhere between 40 and 60K, which is a broad range, right? It's a pretty broad range, but still, it's something that is much better than what you had in the past, and it's something which you can get without effort. And it's the first step right towards building closing the loop and a continuous learning cycle. Other things that I wanted to call out. So if you're not familiar with it, Power BI now supports HTML widgets in R. HTML widgets, when you do that kind of output, support interactivity. So this is an R-powered custom visual, but it could just as well be an R script that you run indirectly. You can hover over them to see the different results. I can zoom in on a subset of this to see exactly where those data points lie, and I can zoom back out, which adds a lot of capabilities to already what I think is a game changer with the R capabilities in Power BI. I also found this gallery with other HTML widget created visualizations. So these are all visualizations that you can now plug into and use in Power BI. And on a final note, so if you create these R visuals for your organization in Power BI, it's a very easy step to package them up as R-powered custom visuals. If you never create a custom visual, if you go to GitHub and go to the Power BI-visuals repository, we have a step-by-step introduction there of how you build your Power BI, your custom visuals. And one section of that talks about building R-powered custom visuals. Now, you can package them up as an R-powered custom visual for your organization. I've got an example of that here, right? So that also your colleagues who would not be familiar with going in and editing an R script can use them. What you do here is you call out the capabilities that you want your visualization to have. So if I go here to the format pane, instead of going in and changing the R script, which in this case is a TBATS to handle the multi-seasonality of this time series, they can just go in here and manually edit those forecast settings without ever seeing the R script. So this is a great way to start like that kind of knowledge management, knowledge building within your organization. Of course, I would also highly encourage you to publish them back to the Office store if you think it's something which has broad applicability. And if you have questions on any of that, or if you struggle with any of that, please feel free to reach out to me directly. And also, all of these examples that I just went through, I have a step-by-step guide with all the code in my blog on the Power BI community that'll help you recreate them.
Cool. All right, thanks a lot, Christian. So if we just switch to screen 8.
Yes.
So what I'm going to go through in my section is something based on the solution templates that we develop. And what I really want to do is not really just take you through the solution template in terms of what it is and how it works, but actually show you under the hood of how we went about operationalizing some of the things that we did, and how if you want to do similar analytics on top of your own data, how you could go about doing that. But before I jump into this, just out of curiosity, how many of you guys have heard of the solution template? Okay, so I'd say about 50-50. So I'm going to give a brief overview of what they are, just for those of you who are not familiar with them. I'm just on the Power BI website over here, and I'm going to navigate under the solution templates. And this actually now redirects us to AppSource, where we have all of our different solution templates available. And the idea of the solution templates really is to provide an end-to-end pipeline starting from a source application where we extract data out. We enrich the data along the way. We land the data in a data warehouse, and then we have Power BI reports that sit on top of that data. And what's pretty interesting about it is some of the solution templates that we've developed, particularly the ones where we are looking at social media, use quite a lot of advanced analytics behind the scenes. And I'm not going to show you how you go about setting up a solution template, but what you'll see if you try it out yourself is it's actually a step-by-step just web installer, which you just click next, 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 and everything gets set up for you behind the scenes. And then you have a Power BI report that you can use. So a lot of the questions that we had to think about when we were creating these templates is, well, how are we going to go about automating all of these advanced analytics pipelines and workflows, and how are we going to do this without any kind of user intervention? Now, what I'm going to show you, is stuff where you could set it up yourself manually, so it does require user intervention, but then it works in an automated way. So you wouldn't have to go about, worrying about how your workflows with your advanced analytics actually go ahead and work. And so the kind of solution template I'm going to use to illustrate this is this advanced search template with Bing News. And what this template does, if you actually set it up yourself, is it asks you for some keywords you might want to track. And then we set up something that sits on top of the Bing News API, which pulls out all the news articles around the keywords that you're looking for. It sends them through this text analytics engine that we've basically created, and it gives you a Power BI report. And if I open the Power BI report over here, you can see it yourself as well if you just click test drive. I've just, for efficiency of time, have opened over here. This is basically the out-of-the-box reports that you do get with the Power BI solution template. And so for the purpose, I'm going to just walk you through this first report page really quickly, but we're going to be really focusing on two types of analytics over here in this session. The first one is the topics, topic clustering over here, and the second one is the sentiment analysis. So before we jump into those algorithms though, if I'm, let's say, a brand manager and I'm kind of looking at this template, and this is a template we set up on top of the Microsoft keyword. So I'm looking for all the news articles that are coming in about Microsoft. And we've monitored data for about a 2-week time period back in March when we set this up. So if I just zoom into this visual over here, this is our topic clustering visual. And this is a custom visual that's actually been built by Microsoft Research that allows you to visualize those sorts of clustering outputs in a very, very nice and intuitive way. So what we've actually done behind the scenes is said, okay, let me look at all the articles I've collected and let me put them into themes that make sense. So as an example, one theme that we've picked up over here is, if I zoom in even more, is let's say company, project Scorpio and year. And if I click into that, that's going to cross-filter my entire report. And what you're going to actually see is the articles that are left over here on the right-hand side are all linked to this Project Scorpio keyword. And in this case, I can actually drill into the articles themselves, open them up, and I can start seeing that this is, this was Microsoft's announcement back in March about bringing, mixed reality to Xbox, and the whole thing, the new Xbox was called Project Scorpio. I can see some of the, let's say, trending entities that are coming out. So Microsoft, of course, is coming out top. We've got locations like San Francisco, because that's actually where things were announced. People, we see all the devices group, CVPs and so on who are coming up. So we see that the algorithm has really effectively just gone, it's gone through all the articles, it's analyzed all the text, and it's figured out what is the common theme that I'm seeing between them, and let me basically cluster them all together into this one kind of bubble inside Power BI. So from the front-end perspective, this is a really cool way of being able to visualize unstructured textual data in a very intuitive way. But this is all great if I'm kind of interacting with this report and I'm seeing it over here, but how do I go about actually bringing something like this into a Power BI report in terms of the back end? And so what we actually use for this topic clustering is Azure machine learning behind the scenes. So how many of you guys are familiar with Azure machine learning? Okay, quite a significant chunk of the audience here. Okay, so for those of you who are not, just very, very quickly, because it looks like most of you are, this is basically Microsoft's machine learning studio, where you can go about building your Azure machine learning experiments. And I'm just going to jump into the actual experiment that we have over here, which is what's powering this. Which is what's powering this visual over here. And what we basically have done behind the scenes is we've authored this sort of machine learning model. And I'm just going to zoom into this a little bit more so you can actually take a look. And yeah, if you aren't familiar with Azure ML, the way Azure ML basically works is it's got a very friendly user interface. You can drag and drop different modules and actually build your own machine learning algorithms this way. So for example, here I have like a module for import data. I can just drag that in. I can go and connect it to different nodes, and that's how I can actually author machine learning experiments. But here's one that I've already actually done. This is what's running behind the scenes for this model that, or for that visual that I showed you over there. And what this is running behind the scenes is something called LDA. And this is an unsupervised machine learning model that's specialized for clustering, especially running on top of things like textual data. So what we actually do is we import the data from SQL. So all of the data we collect about the news articles goes into SQL. We import the data from SQL. We process the text. So we do some pre-processing steps over here, which does things like removes stop words. You can see the full list of things over here, removes numbers and so on, cleans up the text. And then the LDA module that we run over here is something that's also built into the machine learning studio. And you'll see that a lot of the algorithms, if you play around with this, are highly sophisticated. They've all been built by Microsoft Research. Honestly, text analytics ones are absolutely excellent inside Azure ML. And I have no affiliation with that team or anything, but they really, really are very impressive. So in terms of the LDA, what this does is it runs on top of all the different articles, and it figures out, first of all, it assigns scores in terms of topics. So it figures out, which articles are associated with what topic. And it also it actually does something clever. It figures out what are the top features. So what are the top words that are coming up in a topic. And that's how it ties in things like, let's say, Project Scorpio as a keyword. So we then have a bunch of a bunch of Python scripts where we actually just clean up the data that comes out of LDA, and we join the data set back on as something that we're going to get back into, write it back into SQL. So we've got a bunch of the Python scripts here, and I'm not going to go through all of them. They're really just data cleansing stuff. And the final bit is then exporting the data back into SQL, which might kind of seem weird. We're importing the data from SQL, exporting it back, but the reason we do this, we run this algorithm from the data that's already in SQL rather than when the data is coming through our pipeline is for LDA to run, it needs to have the context of all the different articles together, because you can't do clustering on top of one single article because it needs the context of all the different articles to figure out how it's going to cluster things together into these sorts of meaningful terms. So this is great in terms of me training my model and figuring out whether all the different configurations I've done are working the way I hope or not. But this is still not getting me closer to this sort of automation perspective, because I can sit here and I can run this model every once in a while, but that's not going to be very efficient. It's not going to be very scalable if I'm just sitting here every day or so refreshing this. So what you can also do with the Azure ML Studio is actually you can turn things into web services pretty easily. So you'll notice at the very bottom of the screen there's this deploy web service button over here. And that actually packages up everything in this experiment. It leaves me with an input and an output. And what I can basically then do is call this web service, just call the API whenever I want to actually run the machine learning experiment. So that gets me a step closer because that actually packages things up for me so it's something that I can now consume. But how do we, for this solution template, how do we actually consume this? Because if you see how the template runs, once you've set it up, over time, just new data comes through, and no one's going into the machine learning studio and running this for anyone. So what's actually happening behind the scenes? Well, we have a product inside Microsoft called Logic Apps, which is pretty cool. How many of you guys have heard of Logic Apps before? Okay, so how many of you have heard of Flow? Yeah, okay, so think of Logic Apps as basically Flow, but for developers. And if you look at the UI of Flow, and I'm gonna jump into, this is basically when we set up a solution template. These are all the different Azure resources that we deploy. So I'm now inside the Azure portal. And the way Flow, let's say, lives inside, with your Power Apps, inside a kind of your Office subscription, Logic Apps lives inside Azure. That's where its home is. And I'm going to just jump into the Logic app we have over here for scheduling these machine learning experiments. And you'll notice that when I actually go into here, the UI, if you have played around with Flow, is very, very similar. It's these sort of building blocks. So again, kind of like Azure ML, you have building blocks which you can bring together to form different workflows. And this is very similar. I've got these building blocks. I can add them together. I can add new steps as well. And the intention of this is to create these business workflows which I can orchestrate. Now, for this one, you'll see, we're talking about this topic clustering. We can see the topic Azure ML block right over here. And what we actually are triggering on is a recurrence trigger, which is something that's, again, built into Logic Apps. We run this every 3 hours. So basically what happens is every 3 hours, this Logic app will get fired off. And what it's going to do is it's going to run this Azure ML experiment. We pass it 2 parameters. We pass it the URL and API key, which are the parameters you get when you create a web service. So all you'd have to do, if you were just setting it up yourself, and not necessarily this particular experiment, but if you're setting up an Azure ML experiment that you wanted to operationalize, you would basically get this API key and URL, and you would choose the Azure ML building block and Logic Apps, and you would put these 2 pieces of information in, and you would save it, and that would basically orchestrate the running of your Azure ML experiment however often you needed it to run. So in this case, like I've said, we've set it up so it runs every 3 hours, and every 3 hours it extracts the data from SQL, figures out these clusters, writes the data back into SQL, and we're reading the data directly from SQL in terms of the solution template, and we get that nice kind of custom visualization updating. So that's a really, and again, this could be applicable to many different scenarios, like the ones that Christian was showing you. If you're doing forecasting or predictive modeling, you could do something very similar in terms of a workflow to start operationalizing your various Azure ML experiments and having them appear in Power BI. So that's one of the sections I wanted to talk to you guys about. if I jump back into the Bing News template for a second. So we talked about topic modeling and the custom visualization we see over here. Now another one, and this is something that's very, very common for lots of different scenarios, is sentiment analysis. So a lot of people want to be able to carry out sentiment analysis on top of their data, and this is applicable to news articles, it's applicable to many different things as well. Now, this works the workflow for the sentiment analysis is actually, it's using different technologies and it's using a different workflow than the topic modeling, and there's good reasons for that, which I'm going to jump into. So, how many of you guys have heard of the cognitive services, cognitive APIs? Okay, so a fair chunk. So, the cognitive services, and I'm just going to jump into the website over here, is another Microsoft service that I would, if you want to start integrating advanced analytics, I would highly encourage you guys to try this out. We have a lot of different cognitive services that have been released by Microsoft. And the difference between Azure ML and the cognitive services, the way I would kind of highlight it is, in Azure ML, you have kind of the full flexibility of being able to author your own Azure ML experiments. What you are exposed to is the algorithms that you can use to run things. But you need to kind of do your own feature engineering, figure out your own flows, and so on. With the cognitive services, you have basically black boxed algorithms that you can just go ahead, that are already deployed as APIs, that you can just go ahead and start using pretty much straight away. And they solve lots of different business problems. So we have stuff for vision, we have stuff for speech, language, knowledge, search, and so on. So I would highly encourage you guys to take a look at the Azure Cognitive Services page to see what kinds of things are possible. Now, if I actually wanted to go ahead and spin up the cognitive services myself, again, if I start out with my Azure portal, it's really, really easy to do. I can just go into New and find cognitive services over here and select cognitive services, and then I can just go ahead and click Create. And I'm going to be asked a few questions, so I'm going to have to name my cognitive service. So let's just call it Justina. If I can spell cognitive, I choose a subscription, and here I select the kind of API I want to run. So we talked about text analytics for the sentiment analysis, so we can select that. I can select a pricing tier. So let me select an S1. I can create a new resource group, and I click Create. So I'm not going to click Create just yet. Like I need to fill in basically a few parameters inside the Azure portal, and that basically spins that up for me. I don't have to worry about how the algorithm works behind the scenes. I've got all the documentation, so I know what it's going to do. It's going to take text as an input, and it's going to return me a sentiment score. And so I can just click Create, and okay, I actually need to give it a resource group name. And I can now Create, and there we go. And now it's going to go ahead and deploy this. And that's pretty much all you have to do to actually deploy a cognitive service. But again, then the same question we kind of had before. Okay, I've got my cognitive service deployed, have my data, how do I actually go about automating these things and operationalizing these things? And again, Logic Apps is a great way of doing it. Now, the Logic app I want to show you here is going to be a little bit more complicated. This one, looks kind of pretty simple. All we're really doing is saying, hey, run this every 3 hours. And I almost feel like I'm kind of selling Logic Apps a little bit short over here, saying, it's just here to run something and kick something off. But it can get a lot more complicated and a lot more interesting in terms of the various flows you could do. So this is the one we actually use behind the scenes for the news template. And it can also be a lot simpler, so don't be too worried about this. But if you take a look at what this is actually doing, this is now we've moved away from the model of, okay, I want to schedule something every 3 hours or however often. What I've actually done here is there's a trigger inside Logic Apps that says when a new news article comes in, kick off this workflow, which is what we're looking for, because in this case we're actually analyzing news articles, so we want to basically say every time we find new news articles, kick off this workflow and get it to run. And so we do a bunch of stuff around here, which I'm not going to go into a huge deal around, just actually cleaning up the data again. So we clean up the article we get out, we get rid of all the HTML tags and so on. And then you'll notice we have this detect sentiment step over here. And this is, again, just a nice built-in thing into Logic Apps where it can basically pick up, hey, you have deployed a cognitive service. You can just now use it inside your Logic App flow to actually go ahead and score the sentiment for whatever data that you might be passing through it. In this case, it's, I'm triggering this on news articles. Logic Apps has a ton of different triggers for loads and loads of different data sources, so you could trigger this on a whole lot of different stuff. You could bring data in from SQL, so however you want to get that data into, there will definitely be some sort of connector that could help you. And what you can then do is pass that data through. Again, the way Logic Apps works behind the scenes, it's all just doing API calls, and it's inputs and outputs. So an input from one step and the output of that can be an input in another flow. So you can just, if I click over here, you'll see I can just add dynamic content based on the previous steps that I've seen. So in this case, I'm just giving it the text for the sentiment, and that's going to output me the score of the sentiment, and then I write that data into SQL over here. You see an insert document step. So this could have, because we're doing a bunch of other stuff, this looks complicated, but this could have literally been as easy as trigger, detect sentiment, insert into SQL, for example, or insert wherever you want that data to go. So the reason we have these two completely different workflows, one for the topic modeling and one for the sentiment, and as well as other things like key phrases, which we also use, which I haven't really mentioned much, is, again, from an automation perspective, we have to think about what's the right way of automating your advanced analytics depending on your scenario. For topic modeling, because all the data, or differently, for something like sentiment, when I have one article, the sentiment of that article is not going to matter on the sentiment of my previous article. I'm just going to pass it through the workflow and say, okay, I'm passing article A, I'm getting sentiment of article A, and I'm saving the sentiment of that article A into my data store. For things like the topic modeling, like I've said, I need to worry about what were my previous articles like, what are my next articles like, so I need to do that kind of bulk thing of where I look at all my articles together. So this is why one flow is more about looking at things basically document by document. The other one is more saying, okay, let me lift all this data together and bring it back in. Yeah, so basically, just to jump back into the dashboard just for a second. So that's basically how we've brought in, and now we can visualize all of this data inside Power BI pretty nicely in terms of the sentiment, in terms of the topic appearing here. There's some other algorithms I haven't really touched much on, which we also use Azure ML and cognitive services for, which is the trending key phrases and the entity extraction. But it all follows very similar constructs. You have to think about what's the right technology for you. What's the right kind of data science method? How are you going to automate it? And then, how are you going to visualize it? And that's kind of the workflow we've kind of adopted for the solution templates. And, it's one that's, I think, works pretty well. And I would, encourage you guys to try things out. So yeah, in terms of, I guess, if Christian, if you jump back into the slides for a second, in terms of, I guess, like takeaways for you guys from this. You need to switch, yeah.
This one?
Yep, that's the one. From the side from Christian's presentation, as Christian kind of said, he has written a blog post with documenting the various kind of customer stories and customer algorithm kind of data science methods that he's employed, and he's written a really great blog series about that kind of documents and goes through the various things kind of step by step. As well as giving you access to the various scripts and tutorials, so you can try out those very interesting kind of methods, whether you want to try out forecasting or decision trees, whether you want to do the multivariate analysis. There's a lot of different, all those things are documented, and they're very, I think, interesting for multiple different scenarios, so you could definitely try them out.
And there'll be a blog post coming on how to deploy your R scripts as custom visuals, as R-powered custom visuals.
Yeah.
Make that very specific. Yeah. And also on HTML widgets, because I don't have that yet.
Yeah. So he'll be completing his blog series in addition to those as well. So we also have a link to the R-powered custom visuals if you do want to try them out. I would also encourage you guys to try out, if you want to learn more about automating these sort of advanced analytics solutions, you can try out the Bing News template and see what's actually kind of what's actually deployed behind the scenes. I can just jump onto, actually, no, if you could go back to my laptop for a second.
Certainly.
because I just got the link over here. We've also got access to our GitHub, where we've actually open sourced all of the different things we do for solution templates. So we have the actual experiments for the Azure ML stuff in here as well as all the different ARM templates. ARM templates are what's actually used behind the scenes in Azure for deploying these various solutions inside our GitHub. But you could also just go ahead and try it and set it up yourself, and then take a look at the various different pieces, which might be helpful if you want to just take a look at how other people are deploying these sort of advanced analytics solutions. And yeah, and then we've also got our, if we jump back to your slides, we've also got our contact details. If you guys have any, I know we've kind of covered a lot of content and very quickly today, so if you guys have any questions about any of the various things, whether it's the R visuals, whether it's the Azure ML components, the cognitive services, whether it's working with natural language processing and unstructured textual data, just drop me an email or drop Christian an email. You can follow us on Twitter as well and get the latest and greatest updates around these areas. And yeah, and we've just wanted to leave a good, healthy amount of time for Q&A, as we imagine there will be quite a few questions around this. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. And we'll be available afterwards, but also we've got some wheel spin prizes for those of you who want to ask a question in the microphone now.
Yes. No.
Highly attractive. Yes.
No.
And only easy questions.
Yeah, or you're not going to get a wheel spin card.
That's right.
Right. Okay. In regards to the Microsoft Azure and the kind of the products that you were showing on there, my company that I work for, sometimes they're a little bit behind on the cloud type stuff.
Yeah.
Is there a place where I can go personally without having to have the whole corporate IDs and all those types of things set up, play around and learn those things?
Yes, I'm pretty sure you can sign up for both Azure ML as well as, you can get a free Azure trial as well and get, I think it's about $150 or $200 credit to just try things out, and you can just sign up with your own account. You don't need a corporate account for that. So yeah, and you can use, with Azure ML, the studio, you can absolutely use your own.
And everything I showed with R was just the open source version. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know who's here first, so whoever.
I was wondering, for the solution templates, how do you do the actual rollout? Is that another logic flow, or how do you actually build all the things?
So in terms of the rollout, I didn't want to, we have a solution template session tomorrow. I can't believe I forgot to totally exploit you guys. So if you want to learn more about solution templates, please come to our session tomorrow. We're going to talk about this in a lot more depth. But just to answer that question really, really quickly, if I go into the Power BI page and show you guys this in just a second. When you click on Get It Now, that basically is going to take you to our web installer. And that is going to, we've kind of almost created like a layer on top of ARM, where we kind of have a web-based installer, and it's all just running. We're running our own service. It's kind of like an app that we're running and deploying everything. But we are looking to work with people who want to build this stuff as well. So if you're interested in building a template or becoming a partner for a template or learning more about templates, please come to the rapid deployments with Power BI solution templates, or the one that's on the page there. Come there tomorrow. It'll be good. Yes.
When you're working with R coding in Power BI, does any package that I have in R works in Power BI, or there's some limitation?
So let me see. So when you run it on Power BI desktop, we support most packages. You need to install them locally on your machine. In the service, I think we deployed like the 15,000, 20,000 most used libraries. But if you find that there's a library that you think is useful that we haven't installed in the service yet, just let us know, and we'll put it on a backlog to install it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
All right, a couple of questions for each one of you.
Okay.
So,
we forgot about the wheel spinner.
on the unstructured data analysis side, you specified about topic discovery, where you are leveraging LDA, or you could leverage SVD or whatever. Now, how do you assign a topic name there? Right now, it says various keywords which builds a topic. Is there an intelligent way to assign a name there so that you really understand what's the text? An example could be a home run, let's say bat, ball, you say it's baseball. right? Right now you're getting those words. Is there an intelligent way to do that?
I mean, I think, we think we're still pretty intelligent figuring out the various keywords that are kind of linking it up. But yeah, I mean, there's no programmatic sort of way of being, I mean, you'd kind of have to almost manually assign. You could update the data model, but that's the best that the ML can kind of do at the moment. I mean, you could limit it to one keyword and then hope that the one keyword that comes up is the most, the one that's kind of, it does a pretty decent job. But yeah, I agree that it can be a little bit, ad hoc as opposed to just figuring out based on the keywords I found. Now can you figure out how those words are further linked? Yeah.
Okay. Quick question for Christian then is in the forecasting model which you showcased. So can there be self-adaptive learning part of it, which means if you have built a model after some time, the robustness may not be that great. So can it be self-learning, self-adaptive?
So the model, that particular example had like two components, right? One component was regressions, which had a train component. So you could use something like logic apps to schedule when do they retrain. And also they had a time series component, which retrains every time it gets new data, basically. So both yes and no, right? It was a combination of both. But also think that's a good, right? How to put it? That's another good use case for logic apps, right? In that you can have two different sets of logic. Like one is, what triggers a scoring, right? Like when do I, every minute, every hour that I get new data, I will extend the actuals and forecast a different period. But I will have some other trigger, less frequent trigger, for when do I retrain the models. It might be a multi-step business process, but also I notify the model owner so that they can validate the results before they deploy it, etc.
My question is, what if I have built the model outside Microsoft tool, like in Python or in R? How is it to integrate and visualize into the Power BI?
I'll take that one.
Sorry, I missed the first word. If you've built your own model.
Yeah, outside Microsoft, for example, I don't use Azure ML.
Yeah, so
I use my own tool and I build and tested my model.
What kind of tools were you thinking of
for example, Python.
So Python, we actually have support for Python inside Azure ML. So what you could just do is have a bit of a hacky way, but just literally have it trigger to just run your Python script. You can also use Azure Functions, which supports multiple languages, including Python as well, which Azure Functions is essentially just serverless, like running code in the cloud, where you basically say, I want to run this code, and I want to run it. Again, you could use logic apps to trigger it. It has its own triggers as well. And then you could just kind of run that wherever. If you're using, it really depends on the sort of technology you're using that would define the architecture. You could create your own API that you just want to call into as well, and then hook that up using either something like logic apps or using Azure ML as well for that. So there's different ways that you could go about operationalizing.
Is any plan to support Python
inside?
Power BI. Like right now, R is good.
It's on the roadmap, but it's been on the roadmap for a very long time. There's no timelines associated with it. We hear you though.
But also, you imagine if you write out the results anywhere, like that's typically that would be a data source that Power BI could read from. Right, so you could just take it off from there.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Hopefully this is a quick question. I've used R visuals on Power BIs, but the interactivity was a challenge.
Yeah.
But I heard today that HTML goes forward. And the example that I saw was more of zoom in and zoom out.
Yeah.
Does it do slicing?
Not yet. I don't know if that's either. So right now, like basically, already today, right, the interactivity, one-way interactivity always works, right? So I can use any TypeScript-based custom visual or any Power BI native visual, interact with it, and it will filter the R results. But with other R visualizations, they don't filter back out, right? And that's still the case. But HTML widgets, they allow you to have interactive tooltips, and they allow you to, say, spin around like a 3D visualization. That's part of that R plot. It's really like a step forward, but no, it doesn't slice.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I know you just mentioned that you're going to have the session for the solution templates,
Yes.
but I was using the CRM Dynamics solution template.
Yeah.
So the thing is, we kind of have a lot of customizations. We have a lot of fields created as custom fields.
Yeah.
So I couldn't see a way of like importing those custom.
You can, did
I
you
could
go
do
into
it for certain cases, but it was kind of difficult to, again, update the model because it used to take a long time to process those things.
Did you take a look inside the data exporter UI inside the CRM?
Yeah.
And you couldn't see the fields there? Or?
No.
Really?
In the solution template, it just has those basic, you have the base fields.
We pull up the 8 entities, but you should be able to go into the data export UI and actually be able to see the rest of the entities if you want to add additional entities to pull out
like
as
for
well.
example, like we have like a business unit and teams. So when I try to look up those entities, they kind of, they're under the leads or opportunities, so you don't get to see them directly.
Okay.
So
could you drop us a note,
Sure.
and then we'll follow up with you. Just we'll schedule a call or something. We'll look into it because
Sure.
if that's the case, then we'd want to fix it and we want to make sure that it's safe.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Awesome.
This is going to be a quick question. I think you already mentioned it in your session, but I must have missed it. So the HTML-based powered visuals, is that a new feature? I mean, where you get the
Yes.
tooltips and interactivity?
Yes, it's a new feature.
And is it out yet, or is it something
Yes,
that's
it's out.
it's out with this new release?
With which release? That's a great question. Yes, I imagine with the new release.
Okay. And
Yeah.
so is this the one where you said you're going to write a blog post about it? And
Yes,
Okay.
I will do that. It's so much to do. Yeah, I think that's it's great. It opens up a world of new possibilities. So that's yeah. Great question. Thank you. I think we're out of time. So yeah,
Cool.
thank you all very
We'll
much.
hang around if you guys want anything else. Well, thank you.